Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Brian was finishing organizing some documents in his home office when the phone rang. Upon answering, he immediately recognized Megan's voice on the other end, his wife. She was crying, breathing with difficulty, and between sobs, she explained what had just happened. She said she had just been robbed. The tone of desperation hit him instantly, making him sit down in the chair, feeling a tightness in his chest. Megan recounted that the robber approached her quickly while she was walking down the street after a business meeting. She mentioned that he took her money, wedding ring, and the expensive earrings Brian had given her as a gift on their last wedding anniversary. She emphasized that those earrings cost a fortune and that she deeply regretted losing something that held such great value, not only monetary but also emotional. As she spoke, Brian tried to remain calm so as not to worsen Megan's emotional state even more. He listened attentively to every detail, and at one point, she made sure to explain that, luckily, her phone had been in the back pocket of her pants, and the robber hadn't noticed. That's why she was able to call him immediately to tell him what had happened. Megan seemed very shaken, and he, on the other end of the line, stayed there listening, trying to be supportive even though he wasn't physically present. Megan also mentioned that she had filed a police report at the local station and that the case would be investigated, but she had little hope of recovering the items. She recounted that the officers had told her that in cases like these, recovering stolen goods was rare. Brian asked if she was okay physically, if the robber had done anything beyond taking her belongings, and Megan assured him that she was unharmed, just very frightened by the whole situation. He breathed a sigh of relief knowing she was safe, but at the same time, he felt indignant about what had happened. She reiterated that she would finish her trip as planned because she still had work commitments, and then she would return home. Brian accepted, even with a heavy heart, because he trusted her and understood that this trip was important. The following days passed strangely for him. Although he tried to stick to his routine, the memory of Megan's call left him restless. He constantly thought about the scare she had, the loss of the jewelry and the wedding ring, and how all of this would emotionally affect his wife. When Megan finally returned from her trip, Brian was happy to see her doing well. She seemed recovered, in better spirits than he had imagined, and even appeared healthy, which he quickly noticed. She was tanned. Unable to hide his surprise, he commented on the change in her skin tone, and Megan, with a relaxed smile, said that the city where she had been was very sunny, and during breaks between meetings, she took the opportunity to walk a bit, get some fresh air, and clear her mind from the stress that work brought. Brian listened and didn't question it. After all, it made sense. She always enjoyed walking and taking care of her health, and he understood that, even after the robbery, she tried to make the most of her trip. They went through the day as usual, and Megan started unpacking, putting away her clothes and reorganizing her things. Brian didn't bring up the robbery again, only asking if she needed help resolving anything related to the documents that had been stolen, but Megan said she had already started handling everything, that she was taking care of it with the bank and the authorities. Brian offered to accompany her, but she said it wasn't necessary, that she was managing on her own. Throughout the day, while Megan unpacked and settled in, Brian observed her from a distance, noticing her gestures, her movements, and wondering if she was truly okay after what she had been through. He couldn't help but notice that despite reporting such a traumatic event, she seemed calm, even a bit distant. But he preferred to brush those thoughts aside. He figured it might just be an effect of the stress caused by the trip and the robbery. He decided not to push. He simply hugged Megan affectionately when she sat next to him on the couch and said he was happy to have her back. At that moment, Brian believed the worst had passed. He thought the biggest concern now was helping her overcome the shock and move forward. He had no idea that desperate call, which seemed like just the account of an unfortunate incident, was actually the beginning of something much bigger, something that, at that moment, was still completely beyond his grasp to perceive. A few days had passed since Megan returned from her trip. Brian was trying to stick to his routine, but something inside him kept nagging at him. It wasn't just the fact that she had lost such important items, nor the shock she experienced from the supposed robbery, but the way she seemed comfortable, too calm for someone who had gone through trauma. He tried to push those thoughts away, internally justifying that perhaps this was just her way of dealing with things, a form of emotional protection. Until, on an ordinary afternoon, something seemingly trivial happened and changed everything completely. Megan was in the bathroom, taking a shower, and her phone started ringing on the table. Without thinking much, Brian picked up the device and answered. On the other end of the line, a male voice, formal and polite, introduced himself as an employee of the Ocean Pearl Resort, a well-known five-star hotel famous for its luxurious facilities and exclusivity in a popular coastal town. The man informed him that Megan had forgotten a valuable item in the suite where she had recently stayed and asked how she would like to proceed to recover it. Brian, his mind already on high alert, asked what the item was. The employee, naturally, replied that it was a watch and that it was found inside the drawer of the room while they were cleaning to prepare the suite for the next guest. Brian froze for a few seconds. He knew Megan well and was absolutely certain that she didn't wear watches, much less leave one behind in a hotel room. Disguising his disbelief, he asked the employee if he was sure it was Megan, and the man confirmed, citing her name, the suite number, and the exact date of her stay. When he heard the date, Brian felt a chill run through his entire body. It was the same period when Megan said she had been robbed. The employee then mentioned one last detail, which seemed like just an observation, but for Brian, it felt like a stab. The watch was men's. At that moment, Brian swallowed hard and thanked him for the call, saying he would get back to him to arrange how to retrieve the item. He hung up the phone and stood there, motionless, staring at the screen as if it could offer him some explanation. His mind began racing, connecting the dots between the trip, the robbery, the tan, her calm demeanor upon returning, and now the fact that, during the same period, she had stayed at a luxury resort and left behind a men's watch in the suite. Megan came out of the shower shortly afterward, wrapped in a towel, with the relaxed expression of someone who had just unwound, unaware that Brian was there, internally battling an avalanche of thoughts. He silently watched her as she walked into the bedroom and began getting dressed, casually commenting about work that day and mentioning that her schedule was full. Brian heard every word, but her voice sounded distant, as if it were crossing an invisible barrier that had formed between them at that moment. When she finished getting ready, she casually mentioned that in 2 days, she would be going on another trip, this time a bit longer, about 10 days away for professional commitments. Brian, trying to maintain his composure, asked if she was going alone again. Megan replied affirmatively, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, reinforcing that she had mentioned this before. He nodded and said nothing more, allowing her to interpret that as a sign of trust, but internally, he was increasingly convinced that something was wrong. She then approached, gave him a light kiss on the cheek, grabbed her bag, and left for work, following her usual routine. Brian remained seated, staring at the phone, mentally reviewing all the details. The robbery, the tan, the calm demeanor, the men's watch forgotten in the resort. The pieces began to fit together in a disturbing way. He didn't know exactly what he would find ahead, but he was certain he could no longer ignore the signs. Something was happening, and he needed to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As she walked away down the street toward her car, he felt a lump in his throat, not of sadness, but of something that felt even worse, the suffocating sensation of having fully trusted someone who, perhaps, wasn't who they claimed to be. At that moment, the feeling of distrust turned into a silent determination. Brian knew he needed to do something. And for the first time, he realized he could no longer settle for just Megan's words. He needed proof, he needed certainties, because his instincts were screaming that the story she told wasn't complete. And what he didn't yet know was that what would come next would destroy everything he believed about love, loyalty, and family. Brian spent the rest of that day with his head spinning, trying to piece together the fragments of information he had, but everything seemed too confusing. The supposed robbery, the out-of-place tan, the men's watch left behind at the resort, and Megan's excessive calmness since returning. Every small detail now seemed like part of a larger plot, far more complex and painful than he wanted to admit. During dinner, Megan talked normally, recounting the day's tasks and future commitments. She spoke about the trip she would take in 2 days as if it were just another professional obligation, while Brian merely listened, responded minimally, and silently processed everything that was starting to make sense in a different way. The next morning, he got up earlier and watched Megan get ready for work. He noticed that, unlike before, she now varied her departure times quite a bit. Sometimes she left very early, other times after mid-morning, always with plausible excuses, mentioning meetings outside the office or client visits. But Brian was now too alert to continue accepting explanations without questioning them. When Megan left that day, he sat at the table, staring at the coffee cooling in his cup, while an uncomfortable idea began to take shape. He needed to confirm where she was working, who she was meeting, and whether those trips and changes in routine were indeed professional. He picked up the phone and dialed the number of the company where Megan claimed to have worked for years. After a few rings, a receptionist answered cordially. Brian asked for Megan, saying he needed to speak with her urgently. The response was dry and direct: Megan was no longer part of the staff. Surprised, he asked since when, and the woman replied, with the naturalness of someone just doing their job, she left about a month ago. Brian thanked her and hung up, but his hand remained frozen holding the phone. His heart raced, and a chill ran through his stomach. What had Megan been doing every day when she left the house dressed for work, carrying her bag as if heading to the office? Where did she spend her mornings and afternoons? Brian took a deep breath and understood that it was time to act more precisely. He could no longer rely solely on his instincts. He needed concrete evidence, needed to be sure before confronting her and destroying, or perhaps saving, what remained of their marriage. That same day, he made a few discreet calls and got in touch with Jack, a private detective recommended by a trusted friend. After explaining the situation, they arranged the investigation details. Jack would be discreet, professional, and start work immediately, following Megan on her upcoming 10-day trip, observing the places she frequented, documenting everything with photos, videos, and detailed reports. While Jack began the investigation, Brian, at home, tried to find any clues in Megan's behavior that could explain this series of lies. He decided to look through her things for any leads. Megan had always been organized, and as far as he knew, she didn't hide anything. But at that moment, he needed to look with different eyes. He quietly opened the dresser drawers, rummaged through bags she rarely used, and checked folders and envelopes. Amidst documents and old papers, he found a folded receipt, seemingly forgotten. When he unfolded it, he realized it was a receipt for the sale of jewelry at a specialized store. He read the document more carefully, and the shock was inevitable. The description was clear, matching exactly the earrings and ring Megan had said were stolen during the robbery. The same jewelry he had personally chosen to gift her with all his affection now appeared registered as a sale made just a few days after the supposed theft. Without wasting time, he picked up the phone, called the store, and introduced himself as Megan's husband, informing them that he had a recent sales receipt in hand and wanted to confirm the details. The attendant, after checking the receipt number, confirmed that Megan had indeed sold the jewelry in person, receiving the cash payment on the spot. Brian hung up, feeling a mix of anger, frustration, and sadness. This proved that she had lied about the robbery, that she fabricated the entire story to justify the absence of the jewelry and conceal the fact that she sold them. The immediate question that arose in his mind was, why? What did she do with the money? What was the purpose of all this? Without delay, he accessed their joint bank account and, upon reviewing the statement, noticed another pattern he had never noticed before: small daily withdrawals, discrete amounts that individually wouldn't raise suspicion, but when added together represented a significant sum accumulated over months. It was as if Megan had been gradually draining resources, building a secret reserve, hiding her real interests from him. As he closed the computer and tried to organize his thoughts, the phone rang. It was Jack. The detective informed him that he no longer needed to continue following Megan, as he already had everything Brian needed. Brian, who until then had clung to a fragile hope that all of this was just a huge misunderstanding, felt his heart stop for a moment. He asked Jack to send the evidence as soon as possible. Minutes later, the photos began to arrive, a sequence of images that told, in a raw and irrefutable way, the story Megan had been hiding. With each photo, Brian's face grew paler. Megan was hugging, laughing, walking hand in hand with a man. They were on the beach, having lunch together, exchanging caresses as if they were a couple in love on vacation. But what made Brian almost drop his phone was when he saw who Megan was with. The man appearing alongside her in all those records was Jason, his younger brother. Brian felt his stomach churn, his legs weaken, and his chest tighten as if struck by something he couldn't describe. The betrayal, which until that moment had been a devastating hypothesis, took on an even crueler dimension. It wasn't a stranger, not a coworker or someone who crossed her path by chance. It was his own brother, someone who had grown up by his side, shared childhood memories, family moments, life advice. The trust he placed in Jason was total, and now it was shattered, broken into pieces so small he didn't know if they could ever be put back together. Brian closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, he continued looking at the images. He wanted to be sure he wasn't mistaken, but the faces were clear, sharp. Jack also sent a detailed report, listing the places they frequented, the times, the reservations made under Megan and Jason's names. Everything was planned in advance, carefully orchestrated so Brian would remain oblivious to this charade. With blood boiling but his mind strangely lucid, Brian picked up the phone and called Thomas McAllister, the attorney specializing in family law who had been recommended as one of the best in the state. He recounted the entire situation, sent the evidence, the bank statements showing the withdrawals, the receipt for the sale of the jewelry, the photos from the resort, the images sent by Jack, and the complete report. Thomas listened attentively, analyzed each document, and after a few minutes of calculated silence, said the situation was serious, but legally, Brian was in an extremely favorable position. Thomas explained that based on the laws of the state, marital infidelity combined with financial misappropriation could constitute a culpable dissolution of marriage. This type of situation would allow Brian to keep the majority of the assets, including the house where they lived, and a significant portion of the investments, since Megan had used joint funds in a deceptive manner to finance her double life. Thomas stressed that the argument would be based on the violation of the duty of fidelity, abuse of trust, and fraudulent management of family assets. Brian, still shaken but determined, agreed with the course of action. He asked Thomas to immediately initiate the legal proceedings because he wanted to ensure Megan wouldn't have another chance to drain accounts, sell property, or conceal any other assets. The lawyer, quick and efficient, prepared the initial petition, attached all the evidence, and filed the lawsuit that same day. A request for account freezes and asset preservation was also filed, ensuring the estate would be maintained until the judge decided on the division. Brian hung up the phone and sat down, staring at the wall in front of him, feeling an emptiness impossible to describe. It was as if he were living a scene from a movie he never imagined he'd star in. His brother, his wife, together, lying, plotting, while he, at home, believed he was sustaining a relationship built on trust. The shock wasn't just about romantic betrayal but the breaking of all family bonds that, until then, he considered unbreakable. Even with his heart shattered, Brian decided he couldn't let this truth be revealed in silence, in the cold backdrop of a courtroom. He needed everyone to know what had happened, especially those who, like him, believed in the perfect couple image Megan and he had maintained for years. More than that, he wanted Jason, the brother he loved so much, to feel the weight of the choices he made. So, he began devising a plan to expose, once and for all, the truth Megan and Jason had gone out of their way to conceal. From that point on, it wouldn't just be a legal process. It would be the moment when all masks fell, in front of everyone who, until that day, could never have imagined what was happening behind the closed doors of that family. Megan returned from her trip as if nothing had happened. She arrived home with the same light smile as always, pulling her suitcase, greeting Brian with a kiss on the cheek and asking how he was. He observed every gesture of hers with his mind flooded by everything he already knew but maintained his composure, as if he were still the husband who believed in his wife's fidelity. She talked about work, about meetings, about commitments she had fulfilled, adding that more trips would likely come up soon. Brian just nodded, keeping his silence and the firmness he had cultivated since seeing the photos sent by the detective. As Megan unpacked, folding clothes and organizing her things as she always did after each trip, Brian had already decided on the next step. He didn't want to confront her alone, in a closed environment, in a private conversation, with empty justifications and rehearsed tears. He wanted the truth exposed in front of everyone, without space for distortions, lies, or excuses. He needed Megan to face the consequences of her own choices in front of the people who always trusted her, just as he had trusted her. He began organizing the party. First, he called Megan's parents, inviting them to a special dinner at his house. He said he wanted to celebrate another successful professional milestone achieved by their daughter, that she had been traveling a lot and deserved a family moment. They accepted immediately, happy with the invitation and without suspecting anything. Then, he called his own parents, extended the same invitation, and they also confirmed their attendance, excited about the idea of gathering everyone again for an intimate dinner, as they used to do before Megan started traveling so much. The last call Brian made was to Jason, his younger brother. His voice sounded carefree on the other end of the line, as if nothing had happened. Brian kept a neutral tone, inviting him to the family gathering. Jason hesitated briefly and said he might not be able to attend, as he would be participating in a conference out of town. Brian, without changing his tone, insisted, saying it was important, that everyone would really appreciate his presence. Jason then relented and confirmed he would find a way to be there, ending the call as if it were just another family night, like so many others they had shared throughout their lives. With everything set, Brian prepared every detail of the night that wouldn't be a celebration but rather the definitive revelation of the betrayal. He separated the photos, the videos, the report sent by the detective, organized the files, and scheduled everything to be displayed on the living room TV at the right moment. He didn't want fiery speeches or heated arguments. He just wanted the truth, exposed clearly and objectively, so no one could ever say he acted rashly or without sufficient proof. On the appointed night, Megan was especially excited. She got dressed with care, chose an elegant dress, applied makeup as she did for special occasions, and asked Brian what the occasion was, since he had organized everything so suddenly. Brian responded, with the same calmness he had maintained from the start, that he just wanted to celebrate her return, overcoming another exhausting trip, and provide a family moment, as they hadn't had in a long time. Megan smiled, thanked him, and, satisfied, finished getting ready. Shortly after, Megan's parents arrived, bringing with them the typical joy of people about to reunite with their daughter and son-in-law, without imagining that, on that night, everyone would leave with their emotional structures completely shaken. Next, Brian's parents arrived, greeting Megan warmly, commenting on how good she looked, rested, even prettier than usual, perhaps reflecting her travels and recent changes in routine. Megan responded to everyone kindly, kept smiling, distributed hugs, moved around the house as the hostess she had always been. Finally, Jason arrived. He entered with his usual confidence, hugged his parents, greeted Megan with a kiss on the cheek, as he always did at any family gathering, and shook Brian's hand, looking him in the eye, without showing any discomfort or guilt. Brian returned the handshake firmly, maintaining eye contact, but with a heart pounding with a force he couldn't control. Everyone settled in, started talking, reminiscing about old stories, laughing about childhood episodes, exchanging compliments, and catching up on the latest family events. Megan talked about professional challenges, the trips, and Jason made occasional comments, as he always did. Brian observed everything with the precision of someone who knew that, at any moment, this would change forever. When everyone was seated, Brian stood up and asked for everyone's attention. He said that before they started dinner, he wanted to show a video he had prepared, a surprise, as a way to honor Megan for all her effort and professional dedication. He picked up the TV remote, took a deep breath, and pressed the button that started the sequence of images. On the screen appeared the first photo, Megan and Jason walking hand in hand on the beach, their faces lit up by the carefree smiles of those who believe they will never be discovered. Next, another image, the two embracing, sitting on a lounge chair, exchanging caresses and kisses, like a couple in love on their honeymoon. Then, short videos of them laughing, having lunch together, entering and leaving the resort as if they were regular guests. The silence that followed was absolute. Megan froze, her expression of shock evident on her face, while Jason averted his gaze, searching for an exit that, here, didn't exist. Megan's and Brian's parents looked from one to the other, unable to believe what they were seeing. Megan started crying, mumbling confused justifications, trying to say that things weren't as they seemed, but the images spoke for themselves, with a force no words could neutralize. Jason stood up and tried to leave discreetly, but their father, firmly, placed a hand on his shoulder and held him there, looking him in the eyes with an expression of deep disappointment. He said few words, but each one was like a direct blow. He asked how he could do this to his own brother, destroy the family's trust, and betray everything they had built together. Jason remained silent, not even having the decency to try to justify the unjustifiable. As soon as the last images disappeared from the screen, the silence in the room was absolute. Megan remained seated, her face hidden in her hands, crying without being able to utter a single word. The embarrassment was so thick that it seemed to fill the entire space, suffocating any attempt at reaction. Megan's parents, still paralyzed by shame, slowly stood up, avoiding eye contact with anyone present. They passed by their daughter without saying a word, without offering comfort, without even asking if she was okay. They left the house with the unbearable weight of disappointment etched in every step, as if the shame was so great that words simply couldn't express anything anymore. Jason, after hearing his father's firm and direct lecture, remained there for a few seconds, his gaze lost, without the courage to look at anyone, especially Brian. He avoided any eye contact with his brother, turned around, and walked toward the door, leaving in a hurry, without even properly closing it behind him. He didn't say goodbye, didn't apologize, didn't try to justify what he had done. He just left, carrying with him the heavy silence of someone who knows there's no explanation sufficient for the choices he made. Soon after, Brian's parents also stood up. The father gave a slight nod, as if acknowledging his son's pain but unable to find the right words for the moment. The mother, with teary eyes, touched Brian's arm as a silent gesture of support and left alongside her husband, leaving him alone with Megan in that space now charged with everything but love. Brian remained standing, watching Megan, who, until then, could only cry. She didn't lift her head, didn't seek explanations, nor dared ask for forgiveness. She just cried, with her face hidden, as if she wanted to disappear right there. He then took a deep breath, approached her, and spoke in a firm voice, without raising his tone, but letting each word weigh as it should. "You have 1 hour. Just 1 hour to pack your things and get out of here." Megan didn't react. She didn't try to argue, didn't beg, didn't ask for more time. She just kept crying, motionless, like someone who already knew she had nothing else to say, nowhere to run. Brian grabbed the car keys and left. He drove to the nearest place, a small bar he knew well, and ordered the strongest drink they had. He needed something to numb, even if only slightly, the pain that seemed impossible to bear. He drank slowly, thinking about every detail that had led him to this point, from the tearful call about the fake robbery to the photos that revealed the truth hidden for so long. He spent almost an hour there, in silence, without checking his phone, without calling anyone, just letting time pass. When he returned home, he parked, opened the door, and went inside. Megan was no longer there. There were no traces of her in the living room, bedroom, or bathroom. He walked through the rooms in silence, noticing that she had left exactly as he had ordered. No note, no farewell, no last attempt to fix things. She simply vanished, taking with her the bitter memory of a betrayal that no one in the family would ever forget. In the following days, Brian focused all his energy on the legal process. Attorney Thomas McAllister, with whom he had dealt since the beginning, presented the evidence flawlessly: the detective's full report, the photos, the videos, the bank records showing the misappropriation of funds, the receipt for the sale of the jewelry, and even testimonies from resort employees confirming Megan's presence accompanied by a man who was later identified as Jason. Based on these elements, Thomas formulated a lawsuit grounded in the violation of marital duties, backing the claim with the Institute of Culpable Dissolution of Marriage, provided for in state regulations, and also invoked patrimonial protection, alleging fraudulent management of common assets. The judge, upon reviewing all the material, had no doubts. He issued the ruling clearly and objectively. The decision was entirely in Brian's favor. He retained the majority of the couple's assets, including the house he had worked so hard to build, the savings they had accumulated over the years, and the joint investments. Megan, in addition to having her reputation completely tarnished, left the marriage with much less than she could have ever imagined, bearing not only material loss but also public disgrace that spread among friends, family, and acquaintances. Brian moved forward, head held high, with his dignity intact, certain that he hadn't betrayed, lied, or destroyed his own family. He carried with him the pain of having lost not only a wife but also a brother, someone he trusted, who, in the end, proved capable of a betrayal he never could have predicted. But above all, he carried the conviction that no matter how well constructed a lie may be, the truth always finds a way to surface, and when it does, it has the power to shatter all masks, leaving no room for doubt or illusions. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.